Hello everyone, I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. Let's talk about my childhood lunchbox. It was a time capsule of everything the 90s thought was food. There were fruit snacks shaped like dinosaurs, neon-colored yogurt tubes, and of course, the king of them all, sliced ham rolled up with American cheese stuck together like an awkward love story. Every lunch had two constants: sugar and confusion. I thought I was eating fine. I mean, it came in a box, it tasted good, and it had a cartoon character on the label. What more could a kid want? But somewhere deep inside that thermos of chocolate milk and that granola bar that was basically a candy bar wearing a whole grain disguise, my relationship with food was quietly forming. And not in a great way. I didn't know it then, but nutrition had been influencing my body, my brain, my moods, and even how I learned. It was stealthy. It didn't show up as a warning bell. It showed up as afternoon brain fog, crankiness I blamed on homework, and a deep loyalty to Pop-Tarts. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. But at the time, food was either fun or punishment. Broccoli was the villain, pizza was the reward, and sugar was my best friend and worst enemy, dressed in colorful wrappers and labeled fortified with vitamins. No one around me was really talking about nutrition, not in a way that made sense. We had the food pyramid, sure, but it felt like it was designed by a committee of cereal companies and dairy lobbyists. Historians still debate whether the original pyramid's layout was based more on agriculture than actual science. All I know is it told me to eat 6 servings of bread a day, and I obeyed like a carb-worshipping disciple. It didn't help that every commercial told me breakfast was the most important meal of the day, and then showed a kid eating Frosted Flakes while high-fiving their dad in a business suit. So I grew up with a kind of nutritional amnesia. I knew what food tasted good. I knew what was supposed to be healthy. But I had no clue what food actually did to me. And it's not like I was the only one. In fact, there's something oddly universal about the sugar-soaked nostalgia of childhood snacks. I once learned that in ancient Persia, children were given honey to soothe and energize them before lessons. Historians still argue whether that was genuine medicinal practice or just the original sugar bribe. Either way, sweet has always been shorthand for comfort, and I leaned into it hard, until one day, many years later, long after my lunchboxes had turned into vending machine scrambles and rushed dinners, I hit a wall. It wasn't dramatic. No fainting, no medical emergency. Just a moment when I looked down at my dinner instant noodles soda, something vaguely shaped like protein, and thought, how did I end up here again? And more importantly, how did I get trained to eat like this? That question haunted me, because I knew I wasn't broken, but maybe I'd been poorly programmed. And the source code, childhood nutrition. So I started digging into memory, into science, into the emotional archaeology of what we feed kids and why. And like all real change, it started with a memory, not of a grand health transformation or a big scare, just of a bright red lunchbox and the quiet power of what it carried. The first time I connected food to how I actually felt, I was maybe 7. I'd just inhaled 2 blueberry muffins the size of my face, thanks to the school cafeteria's generous definition of snack, and 20 minutes later, I felt like my brain had been unplugged. My limbs got sluggish, like I'd been swimming through molasses. I couldn't focus on the blackboard. And worst of all, I felt angry, but not about anything. Just this weird fizzing frustration bubbling under my skin like a shaken soda. I didn't have the words for it back then, but today I can tell you what it was: a sugar crash. A very real biological reaction to a high glycemic, low nutrient blitz that sent my little system into a roller coaster tailspin. Of course, no one explained that to me. They just assumed I was tired, or moody, or one of those high-energy kids, which I wasn't. Not really. I was just chemically confused. Fast forward to middle school, and my diet was a chaotic collage of cafeteria trays, vending machine roulette, and occasional fast food detours. You'd think I was training for an Olympic event in processed eating. But here's the wild part. This was totally normal. Everyone around me was doing the same thing. We all drank chocolate milk with lunch and chased it with cookies. And somehow, nobody stopped to question why we couldn't concentrate by 2 p.m. or why we felt wired and wrecked at the same time. Historians still debate whether the post-war boom in processed food was the beginning of our modern attention and energy crises in kids. Some point to the commercialization of corn syrup, others to the cultural shift from home-cooked meals to TV dinners and Lunchables. All I know is it hit our generation like a sugar hurricane. I remember one day I got in trouble for snapping at a classmate during math. The teacher said I was emotional and needed to control my attitude. What she didn't know was that I'd had donuts and orange soda for breakfast. Yeah, real surprise I couldn't regulate my emotions. You see, we often assume kids act out for attention or because of some character flaw. But what if, just bear with me here, some of that bad behavior is just blood sugar turbulence dressed up in tantrums? There was a study, once I won't bore you with stats, but it found that kids who eat balanced breakfasts perform better academically and socially. Translation: feeding your kid an egg instead of a toaster pastry might help them ace that spelling test and not scream during group work. And yet, we rarely teach kids or their parents that their food choices are brain fuel, not just tummy fillers. I learned this the hard way in high school when I started skipping lunch to save money or avoid awkward social situations. I'd tell myself I wasn't hungry, but by the end of the day, I'd feel hollow, distracted, and strangely sad. Not depressed, just dimmed, like someone had turned the contrast down on life. Later, I'd binge on snacks, chips, candy, anything I could grab, and then I'd feel sick and guilty and confused. The emotional yo-yo wasn't about willpower, it was about imbalance. Chemical, emotional, even hormonal. Turns out, food is one of the most immediate ways kids experience self-regulation, or the total collapse of it. Take ancient Rome, for instance. Wealthy children were often fed rich, heavy meals, while poorer kids ate lentils, grains, and fruits. Historians still debate whether the simplicity of the peasant diet contributed to better resilience and focus among lower-class Roman youth. The irony: modern science now praises those same poor people foods for their nutritional value. So when I finally made the connection between what I ate and how I felt, it was like finding a glitch in the matrix. Suddenly, I wasn't a moody kid. I was just underfed in all the wrong ways. And that realization stuck with me. It changed how I saw my childhood. It changed how I forgave myself for not doing better. And most of all, it made me wonder just how many other kids are walking around right now thinking they're broken, when really they're just hungry for the right kind of fuel. Food affects mood. That's not fluff, that's biology. And once you learn that, you can't unlearn it. So now, when I see a child throwing a fit in public or zoning out in class, my first thought isn't discipline or diagnosis. It's, what did they eat today? And 9 times out of 10, the answer tells you more than any behavior chart ever could. There's a moment that stands out in my mind, one of those tiny, insignificant things that somehow ends up changing everything. I was visiting my cousin, and her daughter, who was maybe 5, was coloring at the kitchen table. Next to her sat a plate with carrot sticks, apple slices, and hummus. I know, revolutionary. But what hit me wasn't just the food, it was the mood. The kid was calm, focused, even humming a little as she drew. No tantrums, no bouncing off walls, no, I'm hungry 30 minutes later. And suddenly I realized I was looking at something I never had a nutritional foundation that actually worked. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't expensive, it was just intentional. When I asked my cousin about it, she shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, we follow a rhythm: protein, fiber, color, repeat," like it was the most normal thing in the world. Meanwhile, I grew up thinking a balanced meal was a cheeseburger and fries because there was a meat group and a vegetable if you count the lettuce shard barely hanging onto the bun. That moment set off a chain reaction in my brain. If one child could be so grounded simply because of what she ate, what did that say about the rest of us? I dug deeper and learned something wild. The gut is often called the second brain. It produces around 90% of the body's serotonin. You know, the happy chemical. That means the sandwich you eat can literally affect your sense of joy. Historians still debate whether early Greek physicians truly understood the gut-mind connection. Hippocrates famously said, "All disease begins in the gut," but some argue that's been mistranslated or oversimplified. Still, it's spooky how much he got right without a microscope. Anyway, back to the kid with the carrot sticks. Watching her made me reevaluate everything. My own childhood, my eating habits, even my emotions. I started thinking about how food shaped not just my energy, but my confidence, my ability to make friends, my sleep, my skin, my test scores. It was all interconnected like a nutritional spider web, quietly holding or tangling my life. And then there's the fringe fact I stumbled on while obsessing over this. In medieval England, kids in monasteries were often fed a strict diet of grains, legumes, and ale. Yes, ale. Historians still argue whether the ale was safer than water or if it was just an early form of sedation. Either way, kids were being influenced by their diet in ways they didn't understand, just like us. I remember one of my worst school meltdowns happened on a day I'd skipped breakfast and eaten 2 cookies for lunch. I cried in the bathroom for 15 minutes and didn't know why. At the time, I blamed stress or hormones, or maybe the mean girl in 3rd period. Now I know it was probably a blood sugar crash, so dramatic it should have been scored like Olympic diving. And no one noticed. Not the teachers, not my friends, not even me. Because we've normalized erratic behavior in kids as just part of growing up, instead of considering the biological chaos we're feeding them, literally. Let's be clear. I'm not saying carrot sticks solve everything. I'm saying they're a step in the right direction. One that doesn't require a therapist or a time machine or a new identity, just a grocery list and some intention. It wasn't until college that I finally experimented with my own food rhythm. I started small, adding protein to breakfast, eating vegetables that weren't frozen into TV dinners, cutting back on sugar in the afternoon. And guess what? I didn't become perfect, but I became functional, like actually alert during morning classes and not snapping at my roommate for breathing too loud. Food had stopped being the enemy. It wasn't punishment or reward anymore. It was a tool. I started journaling how I felt after certain meals, not just physically, but emotionally. It was like cracking a secret code written in spaghetti sauce and snack wrappers. I realized oatmeal made me feel steady. Heavy pasta made me sleepy. Too much coffee turned me into a feral raccoon in a group project. By treating food like feedback instead of failure, I began to feel in control for the first time in years. And I couldn't stop thinking, what if we taught kids that not calorie counting, not guilt, just connection? What if we said, hey, that sandwich is going to help your brain crush that spelling quiz instead of eat your lunch or no recess? What if food became an ally, not a bribe? That's when it all clicked. Nutrition isn't about six-pack abs or juice cleanses. It's about setting kids up to be the best versions of themselves inside and out. And that starts way earlier than most of us realize. It starts in the high chair, in the lunchbox, in the random snacks handed over in carpool lines. And it starts with someone asking, hey, how did that make you feel? Because that question, that's the real beginning of food education. I remember this one summer when I was 10, I practically lived on popsicles and grilled cheese. It was a glorious blur of sprinklers, cartoons, and a complete disregard for anything remotely green or nutritious. I didn't think twice about what I was eating, because no one else did either. That's just what summer was, a heat wave of sugar highs and crash landings. But now when I think about that summer, I remember the stomach aches, the mood swings, The way I got dizzy after chasing the ice cream truck like my body had betrayed me mid-sprint. I chalked it up to running too hard, or maybe I'm just weird. Never once did I think it was the food. Turns out, summer break is when many kids fall off the nutritional cliff. School lunches may not be perfect, but at least they follow a vague rhythm: protein, starch, veggie, milk. At home, it's often chips and whatever's easy. And look, I get it. Parents are tired. Life is expensive. And sometimes survival looks like frozen waffles and a box of mac and cheese. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to wonder, what if we made it easier to care? Historians still debate whether early American lunch programs were designed for nutrition or simply to keep kids from fainting mid-math class. In the 1940s, when the National School Lunch Program was introduced, it was hailed as both a health initiative and a subtle defense strategy because a nation with weak kids, they said, could never grow into strong soldiers. Funny how food is always tied to power. Anyway, back to my summer of cheese and sugar. I started asking myself if that diet made me feel that awful. Then how many kids are dragging their bodies through the day, now completely unaware that what they ate is hijacking their mood focus, even friendships? There's this theory, kind of fringe, kind of fascinating, that food deserts aren't just physical, but emotional. That even when fresh food is available, kids raised in a cycle of processed meals can develop what's called flavor dysregulation. Basically, their taste buds get so used to high sugar and salt that real food tastes weird. Historians still argue whether this can be fully reversed or if it creates permanent shifts in preference. It's wild. I remember when I first tasted plain yogurt as an adult. I made the face of someone who just licked a chalkboard. But after 2 weeks of trying it again, with some berries and honey, I was hooked. My brain recalibrated. The sweetness of strawberries suddenly became enough. That's the thing no one tells you your palate can learn. And it starts early. What we feed kids now isn't just about keeping them full. It's literally shaping their preferences for the rest of their lives. Imagine if instead of sneaking spinach into brownies, we just normalized spinach. Imagine if taste wasn't the only metric for a good meal. If how it made you feel 2 hours later mattered more than the 10 seconds it took to chew. There's this story I love. Apparently in ancient Rome, wealthy families would assign special slaves to taste the children's meals first, both to test for poison and for balance. These tasters, historians still debate, were part chef, part nutritionist, part bodyguard. Honestly, that's the kind of food attention I wish every kid had, maybe minus the poison. So where does that leave us now? We're in a world where kids are surrounded by ads for neon-colored snacks, where kid food is an entire genre of its own. Think about that. Somewhere along the way, we decided kids needed a whole separate food culture, one that often involves fewer nutrients and more cartoon mascots. It's no wonder so many of us grow up nutritionally lost. But it's not all doom and Doritos. I've seen small changes create massive ripples. A friend of mine started a rainbow challenge with her kids. Each meal had to include as many colors as possible, but real colors from fruits and vegetables. It became a game. They celebrated purple cabbage. They fought over who got the last slice of red pepper. It was chaos, but the good kind. That's the secret weapon no one talks about: curiosity. If you can spark curiosity in a child about food, about where it comes from, what it does, how it feels, you're not just feeding them, you're empowering them. You're giving them the tools to notice, to choose, to ask. And that's where I found myself years later, shopping for groceries and realizing this whole thing, this whole journey back to health, it wasn't about restriction or control. It was about awareness. And I wished I'd learned that earlier, not just because I might have avoided the popsicle stomach aches or the afternoon meltdowns, but because I would have known how to take care of myself sooner. That's what childhood nutrition really is: a head start on self-care. So the next time you see a kid eating blueberries or broccoli, or even just drinking water, don't say, "Wow, you're being so good." say, "How does that make you feel?" Because that question asked often enough might be the most important one they ever learn to answer. There's a strange nostalgia in remembering the cafeteria line. It was this chaotic ballet of plastic trays, sloshed gravy, and the occasional mystery meat. But behind all that controlled food frenzy was a powerful force routine. No matter what we were served, we were fed at the same time in the same place with a semi-consistent layout of food groups. And you know what? That structure mattered. I didn't know it at the time, but our bodies thrive on rhythm, especially children's bodies. They need consistency, predictability, not just emotionally, but metabolically. And those 12, 15 lunches, those weird rectangular pizzas with a side of corn, might have been doing more good than we ever gave them credit for. But then weekends came, and so did cereal for dinner, leftover fries at 10 p.m., skipped breakfasts. Suddenly that rhythm gone, and I felt it, in my energy, in my sleep, even in how I handled the Monday morning math quiz. Historians still debate whether the rise in ADHD diagnoses is linked to changing childhood diets and eating schedules, or if it's just a reflection of our evolving understanding of behavior. Either way, you can't ignore the overlap. Food, mood, and focus are in a love triangle, and the kids, they're often caught in the middle. I remember this phase in high school when I got into power bars. They promised energy strength and something called sustained release, which I think was code for you won't crash before chemistry class. I felt like I was gaming the system. Eating one bar and skipping a meal felt efficient, cool, even responsible. But halfway through second period, I'd get jittery, snappy, then exhausted, and worst of all, I couldn't concentrate. Looking back, I realized I was trying to cheat nutrition, to outsource care, to press fast forward on hunger. But the body's not a machine you can just plug a battery into. It needs more than calories, it needs context. There's a theory I read, kind of quirky, that says the body actually has nutritional memory, that it remembers not just what you eat, but how you eat. That if you grew up eating in chaos, rushed meals, skipped breakfasts, food as bribe, you carry that pattern with you like emotional scaffolding around your relationship with food. And I believe it, because every time I tried to be healthy in adulthood, I found myself rebelling like a 12-year-old being told to eat her peas. It wasn't about the food, it was about the history. So I tried something new. I started small, sitting down for meals. Not scrolling, not standing, not multitasking, just sitting. It felt weird, like I was pretending to be an adult on a cooking show. But something shifted. I noticed flavors. I slowed down. I even started chewing more. I know, wild concept. It reminded me of a story from ancient Japan. Apparently, samurai children were taught to eat with extreme mindfulness, to chew, slowly swallow with intention, and leave one bite on the plate as a sign of respect. Historians still debate whether this was purely spiritual or a subtle discipline training, but either way it worked. These were kids learning how to notice. And that's what childhood nutrition really is. Not a perfect diet, not a checklist of vitamins, but a foundation of awareness. Awareness that hunger feels different than boredom, that thirst sometimes hides behind crankiness, that comfort can be found in something warm and simple, like oatmeal, not just something sugary and neon. I had to unlearn a lot to get there. I had to forgive myself for years of fast food and food guilt. And I had to stop labeling food as good or bad and start asking, what does this do for me? What does it teach me? And it all goes back to those early years, to that elementary school lunch tray, to the mornings when I skipped breakfast and blamed my test score on just being tired, to the days I was praised for eating salad even if I was sad inside, to the first time someone called me healthy and I didn't know whether to feel proud or ashamed. Because childhood nutrition isn't just about what's on the plate. It's about what the plate represents. Care, consistency, curiosity. It's about building a world where food isn't a battleground or a distraction or a reward system, but something that just is. Something that supports, that fuels, that speaks softly to the body and says, I've got you. And maybe, just maybe, it starts with one question. What does your body need right now? Ask a child that often enough, and one day when they're grown and tired and holding a plastic tray in a fluorescent cafeteria of adulthood, they might remember, they might pause, they might choose differently. And it won't be because someone told them what to eat. It'll be because they finally heard themselves. When I started paying attention to the way food affected my body, I realized something both simple and staggering: eating well made everything else easier. I'm not saying kale turned me into a superhero or that quinoa unlocked my third eye, but I am saying that once I stopped treating food as background noise, life got noticeably less chaotic. And here's the thing: no one teaches kids how to listen to their bodies. Not really. We get taught the food groups, maybe a pyramid or a colorful plate, but no one ever sat me down and said, hey, when you feel jittery, maybe ask what you ate for breakfast. There's a whole world of silent lessons embedded in childhood nutrition. Most of them aren't even about food. They're about self-regulation, about permission, about tuning in. I remember vividly the first time I tried meditating. I was a sleep-deprived college student with a caffeine addiction and a knack for pretending I was fine. I sat down, closed my eyes, tried to breathe deeply, and immediately thought of nachos. It was like my brain only had two settings: stress or snacks. Turns out that was my inner child talking. And he was hungry, not just for food, but for comfort, for rhythm, for recognition. There's an ancient Greek practice called cytosophy. It means the wisdom of food. It was this philosophical idea that how you eat reflects how you live. Historians still debate whether the ancient Athenians actually practiced this regularly, or if it was just a thing philosophers preached while eating figs on marble steps. Either way, it stuck with me, because when you start treating meals as moments of wisdom, everything slows down. I began noticing the colors on my plate, the smells in the air, the subtle fullness after eating slowly. I wasn't perfect. I still had frozen pizza nights and panic snacking on almonds, but I was building a bridge between past and present, between the kid who scarfed down gummy bears and the adult learning how to chew kale. And somewhere in that process, I started rewriting the script. No more skipping meals as punishment. No more labeling cookies as evil. No more forcing vegetables like they were acts of penance. Instead, I started creating meals like I was feeding a child I loved, because in a way I was. And that approach changed everything. I no longer ate good food to feel virtuous. I ate balanced meals to feel available, to my work, to my relationships, to my own nervous system. Because here's something wild: studies show that balanced nutrition in children correlates with higher emotional intelligence and improved impulse control. Historians still argue whether this connection is purely nutritional or also influenced by the environments where good food tends to exist, like stable homes or supportive schools, but the link is strong. So what does this have to do with childhood nutrition? Everything. Because when you teach a child how to eat well, not obsessively, not rigidly, but compassionately, you're teaching them how to self-soothe, how to pause, how to prepare. You're giving them a lifelong skill they'll need when life inevitably gets noisy. And you're giving them something even rarer: trust. I think back to a moment from middle school. Our cafeteria had this one day called Build Your Own Taco Bar. It was chaos. Sour cream was everywhere. Kids were daring each other to add jalapenos. But I remember feeling powerful because I got to choose beans or meat, salsa or cheese, hard shell or soft. It seemed small, but those choices mattered because I wasn't just filling a tray, I was practicing autonomy. Nutrition can be a gateway to self-trust, and self-trust is the root of self-care. Even now, as an adult who has unlearned and relearned so much, I come back to that taco bar memory, not because it was healthy, but because it was mine. So if I could go back and talk to my younger self, the one obsessed with sugar and allergic to vegetables, I wouldn't scold him. I'd sit beside him with a plate of real food, colorful and imperfect, and I'd say, "It's okay to enjoy this. Just check in with yourself too." Because that's what I really needed to learn. Food is not the enemy. Food is not salvation. Food is not moral. Food is a conversation. And now I'm finally listening. The final shift came not from a grocery list, but from a question I asked myself one quiet morning. What does nourishment actually feel like? Not look like, not sound like, feel like. Because growing up, nourishment was a checklist, an obligation, a lecture waiting to happen if I skipped breakfast. But real nourishment, it's something softer, something you notice not just in your stomach, but in your breath, in your brain, in the way your shoulders stop hugging your ears for once. And that's what I wish every child could learn. We spend so much time talking about childhood nutrition, like it's an obligation, a war against sugar, a battle for broccoli. But what if we reframed it? What if instead of saying, "Eat your vegetables," or else we asked, "How do you want to feel after lunch?" That's a completely different kind of education. And it works. I remember volunteering once at a community center where kids got to help prep their meals. Nothing fancy, chopping apples, stirring yogurt, sprinkling cinnamon. But the pride on their faces when they tasted something they made that was nourishment. Turns out, one of the most effective ways to teach kids about food is to put it in their hands. In 1946, the U.S. launched the National School Lunch Program to address child malnutrition after World War II. It was a monumental shift, but historians still debate whether its long-term impact has been nutritional empowerment or a bureaucratic maze of pizza counting as a vegetable. Still, the spirit of that movement mattered. Feeding children is one of the most basic and most sacred acts of care, and when it's done right, it lays down roots that last a lifetime. Now that I'm older, I can see all the subtle ways childhood nutrition continues to echo in my life. It's there when I choose snacks based on energy, not guilt. It's there when I stop to actually taste my food, instead of inhaling it like a stressed-out raccoon. It's there when I cook for friends, and something deep inside lights up because feeding people feels like love in a bowl. There's a fringe theory floating around that humans evolved larger brains because we started cooking, that the act of heating food made nutrients more bioavailable, fueling brain expansion. Historians still argue the accuracy of that theory, but the poetry of it sticks with me, that maybe every time we stir a pot, we're connecting with something ancient and wise. So what now? What do I do knowing all this? I try to parent my inner child a little better, not with restriction, not with shame, but with gentle reminders that food is fuel, yes, but it's also story, memory, and care. And I advocate. Quietly, persistently, I talk to friends with kids and remind them that modeling joy around food is just as important as teaching nutrients. I support programs that give children access to real meals, not just calorie counts. And I keep learning, because childhood nutrition isn't a phase. It's a foundation, one that needs tending even long after the lunchboxes are gone. If I've learned anything, it's this. Food leaves fingerprints on your body, on your emotions, on your sense of safety. And when you finally start to trace those prints, not with judgment, but with curiosity, you find patterns and eventually peace. So here I am, grown up, still learning, still healing, still figuring out what nourishment feels like. But every meal, every mindful bite brings me a little closer. And in that closeness, there's hope, there's memory, there's joy.